Hello. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session on Azure Cognitive Services. So, my name is Sanya, and I will be walking you through the basic principles of cognitive services brought to you by Microsoft Azure. So, without any further ado, let's get started with this presentation. So, just one second, let me start with my slides. So, before we start, let me give a very brief introduction to myself. So, I'm Sanya. I work as a research intern at the University of Texas at Austin. I am a Gold Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador. I've been a two times Kaggle expert, a Kaggle notebooks and discussions expert, and I am an Azure Developer Lead. So, before we begin with the topic straight away, we need to know what actually entails Azure Cognitive Services. So, Azure Cognitive Services basically allow every developer and data scientist to exercise AI responsibly and to use AI services without further ado and without much coding. So, if you are familiar with machine learning, you typically would use a programming language like Python or like R, or if you've taken the Andrew NG course, then you would definitely opt for GNU Octave. However, when you're working with Azure Cognitive Services, you don't need to ensure that you are good at programming or that you can actually write some simplistic codes. What you have to do is just embed the APIs that are already made available to you to create real time applications, to create resilient applications in real time that enable you to see, hear, speak, search, understand, and accelerate advanced decision making into your applications. They enable developers and data scientists of all skill levels. So you may be a novice or you might be an experienced data scientist. You can use Azure Cognitive Services and integrate them with your resilient applications to improve their availability as well as improve their performance in general. So I hope what is meant by Azure Cognitive Services was quite clear by now. So let's just proceed to the next slides wherein we talk more about the advantages of cognitive services. So, why should I use Azure Cognitive Services and not write the code on my own? So, first things first, if you're familiar with something known as transfer learning. So, transfer learning basically means that you are using a pre trained model on your own use cases, on your own data sets, on your own samples, so as to generate newer results. For example, if you use models like AlexNet, if you're familiar with models like AlexNet or like Inception V3, so these models have been trained on data sets that contain millions and millions of images. For example, the ImageNet dataset contains 14 million images. So however, creating your own custom models is actually a lot more difficult than actually using models that were created beforehand. So, transfer learning is basically based on the principle that you enable these pre created, pre trained backbones to train themselves on the data that you provide to them and then provide results accordingly. So, similar to transfer learning, you can use cognitive services, with the only exception being that you don't even have to write the code for data accessibility and for rendering that your files are accessible by the deep learning or the neural network that you're talking about. So you can customize pre-trained models with breakthrough AI research. Also, when you are working on something or when a novice is working on something, he cannot, you know, ensure that the best possible metrics are achieved by whatever results are trying to be reaped, right? So whatever results you get are not going to be the best and the most unique of their kind. This is because you have varying levels of perception, you have varying levels of accuracy when you are actually training your own model. However, these pre-trained models that are provided to you by Azure Cognitive Services are one of a kind, and they have been trained by data scientists who excel at what they do, who are experts in their field. And that is why you can use these pre-trained models to provide the best possible outcomes to your research and provide the best possible outcomes to the data set or the samples that you are using. Now, empower responsible use with industry leading tools and guidelines. One of the major problems that I face when I'm writing code is that the Jupyter notebook or the IDE, whatever that is it that you're using, usually has limited capabilities and you can't run a lot of applications on it because you need a lot more compute space than what is actually provided to you. Even Google Colab has certain limitations when it comes to compute if you're running massive or voluminous bulks of code. So when you're using Azure's customer vision or Azure's cognitive services, you can integrate your cognitive service or your cognitive service application with the cloud so as to ensure that you have massive accessibility and massive versatility as well as massive compute space and storage as well, so as to ensure that your results are on point as well as computationally efficient. Next up, like I said, you can deploy cognitive services anywhere from the cloud to the edge with containers so that it could be accessed by machines all over the world. So I hope you understand why is cognitive services important and how has cognitive services revolutionized the way AI is deployed in real time in the modern world. Now, let's talk about the list of cognitive services provided by Microsoft Azure. So, first of all, we're going to be talking about speech, then language, then vision, then decision making, and finally, OpenAI. So let's talk about each of these services in detail. So let's talk about cognitive services for speech. So cognitive services for speech, as the name entails, has four basic applications. The first one of these is speech to text translation. So for example, whenever you click on the mic button, whenever you're trying to run the search results on Google search. So the mic button basically transcribes audible speech that you speak into a readable, searchable text format, which could be processed by the search engine and results could be provided to the user or to you. Next up, you have text to speech, that is converting text fragments or written text into an audible format. Like it says, convert text to lifelike speech for more natural interfaces. For example, there is a very famous project that a lot of developers take up these days called Jarvis. So Jarvis is nothing but it's based on text to speech translation. It basically reads these snippets of codes and then it runs them into an audible interface and it speaks as to ensure a more natural or a more lifelike interaction. Obviously it's more lifelike to interact with an audible or a speech enabled robot than it is to interact with just an ordinary chatbot, right? So, this is how text to speech translations or text to speech transcriptions can actually ensure much better availability and much better user interfaces as well. Next, you have speech translation. So, you can integrate real time speech translation directly into your applications. And then you have speaker recognition, which can basically allow you to identify who the speaker is when a given audio is played, and that would ensure massive text classification as well as speech classification as well. So this is how you can use cognitive services for speech. These are the samples where you can use cognitive services for speech. And now next up, let's talk about language. So cognitive services for language is a service within the domain of Azure's cognitive services for language that extract, classify, and understand text within documents. Now, for example, the first one of these is talking about broad entity recognition. For example, if I use something, a phrase like "it's raining cats and dogs." Now, this is a very famous phrase that basically means that it's raining heavily, right? However, when you run it through a machine or a computer that doesn't really know what these phrases mean, then it will definitely assume that it was actually raining cats and dogs and not just raining heavily. So this is what broad entity recognition seeks to do. It seeks to ensure that your computer is able to understand phrases and words that have multiple applications and that can be used together to imply something differently as compared to what their literal meaning was supposed to mean. Next up, we have powerful feedback analysis through opinion mining. Now, if you're trying to curate a service that is just going to provide a general consensus of feedback experience or the user experience while working through a particular product, sentiment analysis or the language service is the best possible resort for you, because you don't have to run any user specific NLP applications for this. You can simply use opinion mining services provided to you by Ash's cognitive services for language, and then it can ensure that it actually goes through each of the feedbacks provided to it by the users, and then it is able to decide whether the feedback is positive or negative in general. Next up, document summarization. You are supposed to submit a book report tomorrow and you are running short on time. So what do? You feed the document, the book that you were supposed to read into an NLP service, and the NLP service automatically goes through it because obviously its reading speed, perception speed is a lot faster than that compared to the average human. And then it finally summarizes the entire document and procures it before you. So that's how it can summarize a given document. Next up, you have creating conversational layers over data, which, like I gave you this Java's example, was just supposed to ensure that you can interact with a machine that resembles an actual human, that talks like an actual human talks, that converses like an actual human, so as to give the user a more familiar interface and a more natural interface to interact with. And finally, you are processing unstructured medical data. So this is actually a very unique use case provided to you by Microsoft Azure for language. It ensures that you can provide a good sentiment analysis and a good prescription analysis of medical data that has been provided to you, so as to ensure, very basic diagnosis that, okay, if a particular person is taking these medicines, these could be some viable reasons, these could be some viable diagnosis that we can try to run on these patients. However, as I always say, you cannot actually replace an actual doctor with a machine or with any sentiment analysis IT service. This is what I feel, because doctors have a lot more experience. They have been trained specifically for this, whereas machine learning models are more prone to errors. So let's just proceed with the next part of the language services, which are language service. So Azure Language Service provides several NLP features to understand and analyze text, like I already told you. The translator service, as you would be well familiar with, is used to translate snippets of text from one language to another. And Lewis is a very important application of Microsoft Azure. It's called Language Understanding. It is the cloud-based conversational AI service that applies custom machine learning intelligence to a user's conversational or natural language text to predict overall meaning and pull out relevant information. So it's just its most resilient NLP service that can be used to talk to a user, converse with the user, and pull out the most relevant abstracts of text from the conversation and then process it accordingly. Finally, you have a Q&A maker, which is like a custom chatbot, a very simplistic chatbot, which is a question and answer service wherein the user asks questions and the chatbot answers, and the chatbot asks some questions regarding the user's problems and the user answers. And so, based on the text input that is provided to the chatbot, it breaks it down, lemmatizes it. Lemmatizes is basically means that breaks it down into smaller, meaningful chunks, processes it, and then provides the best possible answers. So, I hope language services were very clear. Next up, we are going to be talking about Azure Bot Service. So, Azure Bot Service is one of the most interesting applications of Azure's cognitive services, wherein you can actually create a complete chatbot, a complete bot based on the bot framework composer. You can add language to it, you can add speech to it, you can add vision to it, so as to ensure that it can understand inputs in either format. It can understand either visual inputs or audio based inputs, and then it can process it accordingly and provide the results. You can deploy it to popular channels with minimal code changes. You can integrate your bot services with any web application or any mobile application that you are trying to create and curate, and then it can ensure that you have better user interaction with it and a better user experience as well. You can also create conversational AI chatbots for healthcare. So these are very common projects these days, wherein you create a conversational AI or a chatbot, a bot service, wherein the user asks questions related to his or her health, and the chatbot provides the best possible solutions based on the data that it has been provided with, based on the data that it has been trained on. However, like I always say, it's definitely not a good option to replace the need of an actual doctor with a chatbot. Let's proceed to the next slide, wherein we are going to be talking about cognitive services for vision. So there are three very basic instances. There are three very basic use cases of cognitive services for vision. The first one is computer vision. So computer vision analyzes content in images and videos. So basically, you're just provided with an API, and you can link this API with the code that you are writing. And once you have integrated the API with the code, it can ensure that you are using the computer vision model that was provided to you by Azure Cognitive Services, and then you can train your model based on the computer vision model that was provided to you and get top-notch, high-quality results. Next up, you have custom vision. So custom vision is slightly different from computer vision. Custom vision is a no-code interface wherein you will be provided with a very simplistic UI to actually feed images into, and then you can once you have fed images into the UI, you can actually train a neural network. A pre-trained neural network could be trained on the images that were provided to you, that you provided to it. And once the model has been trained, you can get state of the art outcomes and integrate them with other applications, for example, Power Apps, to get high quality outcomes. Next up, you can use Face API to detect and identify people and emotions in images. So these are the APIs provided to you by cognitive services, and you can just integrate them with your applications to get results, just get top notch results that were otherwise impossible to get if you had no prior experience with machine learning or with artificial intelligence in general. So if there are any doubts as of now, I would like to invite them in the chat box so that I could answer them, because this is a little different topic from what we usually do. We're going to be dealing with the services one on one. We are dealing with the services and what are the services provided to you by Azure Cognitive Services. So I welcome any questions or any doubts in the chat box. Okay. So since there are no comments as of now, let me just proceed to the next slide. Decision making. So decision making, or the ability of decide on its own. Now you usually would say that how is an AI service going to decide on its own? So you don't really have to ask it to make life changing decisions. You can ask it for simple data based or business analytics related use cases for which it would be able to take the best decision. For example, a anomaly detector identifies potential problems early on. Obviously it can detect any anomalies or any outliers in the data or in the code that you have written, and then it would be able to suggest that this is a more better solution than what you have proposed, this is a better solution than what is your proposition, and henceforth you can replace the snippet of code with this snippet of code. For example, autocorrect is something that has been annoying us as well as helping us out for a very long time now. So it identifies anomalies or outliers in the text that you have written, and then it suggests that, okay, did you mean this, because I didn't find this particular word in the dictionary that you use, and then you can adjust it accordingly. Next, you have content moderator, detect potentially offensive or unwanted content. It can detect some words that can actually degrade the quality of the content that you are creating, offensive words, derogatory words in general, and then it can remove these words from your original content, or declare trigger an alerting system wherein it could alert you to the fact that you are using some words that do not comply to the policies of the website you are posting it on, and then it would enable you to change your words accordingly. Next up, you have a personalizer to create rich personalized experiences for every user. It can create well established plans and services so that based on the user's experience, based on the user's behavior, so as to deliver the best possible content. Next, you have OpenAI. So OpenAI is a very new service brought to you by Microsoft Azure. It's a very new service brought to you by Microsoft Azure for Cognitive Services. So it can apply advanced coding and language models to a variety of use cases. It has very resilient services, and obviously it's a tier above the regular tier because it has a lot more compute space, it has a lot more storage capacity, and it has a lot more computational ability as well. So you can create very research oriented, very project driven models using OpenAI by Microsoft Azure. So these were all the services provided to you by Azure's Cognitive Services. If there are any questions, I would like to take them in the chat box now. Okay, so since there are no further questions, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you learned something new and hoping to see you soon. Thank you. Bye bye.